Very good morning to all our dear listeners. It's an afternoon to some people, depending where you are, it's an evening. But you are most welcome to yet another edition of ACFIM Talks. Your host, as usual, is Felix Kafuma, and today we are discussing a very interesting topic, and that is understanding and interrogating the proposed financial year budget, which was presented last week. Um, uh, we want to look at the hits and the misses, and we're looking at the financial year 2022 and 2023. So with me in the studios, I have um, Mitchell Ainebyona. I hope I pronounced that name right. I'm
Mitchell.
C. Mitchell.
Mitchell.
Yeah, Mitchell. Michelle is for the other gender.
Or if you're French.
It's French, probably. Yeah, I have Mitchell Ainebyona and Mulonda Moses. I'll be introducing them in a short while. But before I introduce them, let me take this time, a minute or two, briefly to invite everybody who is just joining in. We sorry we are late. We started a bit slightly late. We had some technical issues. But for those who always wait for this show, please join the discussions, be part of it on our Facebook page, ACFIM, on our YouTube account, ACFIM Uganda, and Twitter handle at ACFIM UG, and be able to participate, send your questions, send your comments, and so it's good to have you and interact with us. But sending your questions, and as we start, let me now, with honor, introduce. You will forgive me. We only have it's a man's show, no ladies, no pun intended. That's how it happened. All the ladies were committed, and that's understandable. But let's represent you very well in this show. I have with me. Let me start with Moses Mulonda, who is the president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association (UPPA). He's a journalist and really qualified journalist with a Masters of Business in Administration from Makerere University, but also a degree in Mass Communication. He's one of the leading staff writers for New Vision, one of the leading papers in Uganda, and he writes on the national budget and he coordinates the Greater World Development Forum. You are most welcome, Moses Mulonda.
Thank you, Felix.
All right. I also have Ainebyona, who is an economist, as currently working with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, and that's the group that looks into how our budget processes, how transparent they are, how participatory they are, whether they do represent the priorities of the wananchi, and they track the process and utilization. He's currently the budget policy specialist with the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, but has a lot of experience in research and public policy development. You are most welcome, Ainebyona Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and good morning, viewers.
All right. Since we lost time, allow me to dive deep into the discussions, and I'm going to start with Moses. We all know that the approved budget for financial year 2022-2023 is standing at 43 trillion, about 2 trillion less than the current budget that is coming to an end in a couple of months, which stood at 44.7. Yes. Let me first pick your brains and your expertise. First of all, those are figures, but break it down for a wananchi. What are the wins? What are the losses for a barefoot man or woman, for someone in the market?
Okay, first of all, our viewers have to understand that the budgeting process has just started for the next financial year, 2022-2023. It started with government presenting the budget framework paper towards the end of December 2021, as the Public Finance Management Act requires. So what has been released in the budget framework paper, it's the draft budget for the next financial year, but the discussions are still on. It has been put at 43 trillion. But from the previous experience, usually at the end of the budgeting process, which will end in May, when Parliament is required to finally approve the final budget, the figures keep changing. So, but yes, it has been put at 43 trillion, but slightly lower than the budget for the current financial year of 2021-2022, which is 44.7 trillion. But I also have to inform the viewers that because of the supplementary budgets for the current financial year, in November 2021, last year, Parliament approved a supplementary budget of 3.8 trillion. And last week, another supplementary budget of 4.7 trillion was presented. Now, this means at the end of the current financial year, the total budget will have risen from the initial 44.7 trillion to over 53 trillion. But the major concern from a number of several stakeholders is that whereas the expenditures are escalating, the revenue collections are not increasing, because even in the course of this week, URA released revenue collection figures, and they indicated that for the first half of the current financial year, they have registered a shortfall of close to 1 trillion, about 900 billions. So certainly that means that the additional resources that have caused the budget to rise to 53 trillion will certainly have to come from borrowing. And the revenue collection target for the current financial year is about 22 trillion, but debt repayment, the portion of the national budget that is going to debt repayment is about 15 trillion. The wage bill is 5.5 trillion. Now that means that all the money that government collects here, revenue collection, if you put off the money that government spends on debt repayment, about 15 trillion, and the wage bill for paying government workers, which has reached 5.5 trillion, it means government will be left with nothing, with actually even a deficit. Now, it means to implement all the government programs, activities in all the different sectors, the money would have to come from borrowing. So that's a very big challenge that we have as a country, that our national budget actually is not realistic. Ainebyona, as an economist, will be confirming this, that government is spending beyond its means. The revenue collections are very meager, but the expenditures keep escalating. But for the budget for the next financial year, which was approved by Parliament last week, the major concern of the budget committee was that the portion of the national budget that goes to security keeps going up. You will all recall that in the last financial year, about 3.8 trillion of the budget for security was classified expenditure. So the bulk of our budget is actually going into recurring expenditures. We even borrow for recurrent expenditures. Even when you look at the budget for the local governments, which is about 4.7 trillion, studies indicate that more than 85% of it goes into recurrent expenditures. Actually, for wages alone for local governments, 65% of our budget for local governments goes to paying wages. And that is because government has created so many administrative units which have caused the cost of public administration to be so high. Our government has been the key flagship project for the next financial year, even for this current financial year, is the parish development model, which has been allocated 465 billions. But government has been promising that each parish will be given a minimum of 100 million. So if you divide 465 billions, certainly that is not enough for each parish to get 100 million, because we have more than 10,000 parishes. It would require more than 1 trillion to be allocated to the parish development 1.1 trillion to be allocated to the parish development model for each parish at least to be able to get 100 millions, regardless of the size of the population, which is another debate, because that has been a concern for some legislators from the central region. They say their parishes are densely populated, so 100 million is just a drop in the ocean that cannot change anything. The other thing is government has put money about 450 billions in the budget for the next financial year to increase salaries mainly for the scientists, medical workers, science teachers, but they have not put in money to increase salaries for other categories of government workers. And that is a major concern for so many other people, because so many civil servants are extremely paid poorly and they handle billions of money. Many people think that is why corruption continues to be so high, because these people are handling billions of money and they are paid peanuts. There has been a major concern in Parliament that government has cut the budget for the health sector by 111 billions, and at a time when we are still struggling with COVID. And the budget, the Parliament decision was that this money should be reinstated. The 43 trillion budget government, the revenue projections are that 25.5 trillion will be coming from revenue collections. Of course, these projections were made before the economy was fully reopened. I am sure, in as much as government has been struggling to meet the revenue collection targets in the next financial year, there is a high likelihood that they will be able to achieve the targets because the economy has been fully reopened. I looked at the minority report from the opposition on this draft budget, and their major concern was capital flight. Their argument is that all the trillions of money government is allocating to the works and transport and other infrastructure projects, it goes to foreign companies which actually repatriate the money, and that is very true. I don't know what government will do to change that, but it's a very major concern that a huge portion of our national budget that goes to infrastructure projects, it actually goes to foreign companies which repatriate the funds. The local companies, especially the construction companies, have not yet, government has not helped them to build the capacity to be able to take on these big projects. So because of what I told you concerning the debt repayment, increasingly every financial year, the portion of the national budget that goes to debt repayment actually goes up. In the current financial year, it is 15 trillion. In the budget for the next financial year, it is 16 trillion. So right now, close to 40% of our national budget actually goes to debt repayment. And our public debt has now risen to about 73 trillion. But the major concern from many from many experts is that whereas people in government keep arguing that our debt is sustainable, but many of us argue it is not sustainable, because not only is debt repayment now taking the biggest portion of the national budget, but also our tax to GDP ratio is actually one of the lowest in the world at only 13%. When a country has a low tax to GDP ratio, it means, and the Ainebyona will be confirming this, it means that it has limited capacity to raise enough resources to pay back the debts, to pay back the loans. So, and I think that is why government is now scaling down on the rate of borrowing, and they have now resorted to rationalization of government, merging different government entities and reducing on wasteful expenditures. Only that my major concern is that they are overdragging their feet on this issue. The plan has been there for the last 6 years, but they are over-dragging their feet in merging because, of course, we have so many government entities that are doing the same work, and that is a step in the right direction, merging them and minimizing on wasteful expenditures. But of course, in the draft budget, in the budget framework paper for the next financial year, they have indicated that they have saved about 1.2 trillion from cutting from a number of wasteful expenditures and reallocated the money. But of course, more money can be saved by reallocating and cutting from wasteful expenditures and merging government entities. It's just that government has been very slow in moving in that direction.
I seem to be losing a little bit, Moses. But let me. I'm going to come back on that issue of rationalization. Let me first bring in Ainebyona in here. Can you hear me, Ainebyona?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right. Moses, I'm going to come back to you on that one because you've really helped to carry down what the outlook of this proposed budget. And coming to you, I know for a fact that CS Bag is in the thick and thin of this process. You have participated and you are still participating. But I from where you stand, from your standpoint, what are your quick thoughts looking at this 43 trillion budget framework paper that is proposed by the executive that has been debated in Parliament? What are the quick wins? What are the quick losses we can make of this budget?
Thank you very much, Felix, and thank you very much, Moses. Moses has literally talked about everything. Just maybe firm up some of the things that he has shared. Felix and the viewers listening, it's important that we first understand the context. I love to usually paint a context before we delve into some of the deeper discussions, knowing that the viewership may not know some of the things that we are going to say, technical as they may. Felix, we've been in a pandemic, and the COVID has been very, very, very detrimental to our economy. A number of things that we had initially planned in our NDP3, of course, were affected. A lot of targets that we had set out were distorted. We saw an increase in poverty levels. I think the Uganda National Household Survey report of 2021 reveals that about 3.2 million extra people fell into poverty as a result of the COVID-19 impact on the economy. We've seen school dropouts, that's on the socio-economic. We've seen a low rollout of vaccines, despite there being an outcry at the peak that they wanted more vaccination. Government was not able to get the right doses. They came through, but people were still having a low uptake. Out-of-pocket expenditure as well increased. You know that. We have only about, I think, 3.9%. If you look at the Uganda National Household Survey, support the latest, about only 3.9% can access insurance, So most of the other population was accessing their health financing and support from their pockets, something that was quite costly. In terms of the economic outlook, we see a widened trade deficit as a result of the COVID-19. I remember in 2019, it was about 3,676 million USD. As a result of the COVID-19, when we pulled out towards the end, I think around last year, it was at around 5,000 million USD. That's a big trade deficit. We also saw a decline in remittances, people who send money from abroad to support their families within the diaspora, that also reduced by about 189 million in the previous financial year. So we also saw a reduction in foreign direct investments. All these are things that we have to put in context before we start blaming the ministry for some of their decisions that they have done. So it's good to understand where it is that they're coming from before we get into delving what it is they've now chosen. With that background, Felix, I would want the viewers to know, I know we can speak very technical things and sometimes we lose them. The National Budget Framework Paper, like Moses said, is part of the critical processes in the budget making process. It's the one that actually provides a macroeconomic picture of the budget for the next financial year. And this is very critical, of course. It plays a very critical role in achieving the country's vision and objectives, as laid down by the National Development Plans. So it lays a very good foundation for any person to assess where this country is headed regarding finances, So as Moses mentioned, towards I think the end of last year, Parliament passed Ministry of Finance tabled this before Parliament while we're getting to the festivities. And as CSBAG, as usual, we sat down to try and internalize it and review it, especially at the citizens' perspective, not looking at the high level. And we're trying to break it down. What is in it for the citizen? What is it? What is there for them to celebrate about this new budget? Is it a budget like any other? Especially given the issues that we've gone through, the issues that I have painted. People have fallen into poverty, FDI inflows have reduced, a number of issues are at hand. Has this budget been created in a way that will help address some of those issues? Is what we sought to look through as we were reviewing this. And by law, of course, the Public Finance Management Act does provide for the Minister of Finance setting this and preparing it and sending it before Parliament. And looking at the theme to begin with, because the theme speaks a lot. It's when I'm analyzing the budget, I will look at the theme and look and make sure that all the things that you've put in the theme are reflected in the allocations done. If you look at the theme, it was actually changed, I think, towards the end of last year. The theme of the budget of next financial year is full monetization of the Ugandan economy. One, through commercial agriculture, take note of that, industrialization, market access, and digital transformation. Felix, in my opinion, those are very, very, very good, well thought out areas and thematic areas to look for, given the picture that I have painted of what is at hand. The bigger question now goes to how much of this has been actualized in the figures that we are going to discuss about in the next few minutes. So looking at this, Moses has already painted quite a number of this. We are seeing increasing expenditures. We're seeing increasing allocations to debt repayment, which has now gone up. And I think we're now going to allocate some money on the principal, this time on the principal payments of the debt that we have accrued over the years. Before, we had just been allocating money just to the interest on the debt that has also been growing exponentially. I think it's now close to almost 6 trillion, But now, some of those things are coming to bite, which we will discuss hopefully later. We are seeing a reduction in revenue. By the way, we want to commend URA for, to be honest, I expected the target less given what was at hand. The economy was shut down. I mean, it was partially open, but they were still able to collect what they collected, and for that I commend them. However, the target was set, and it's really, really, really low. If you look at the previous targets that they had set, they looked good on paper. I mean, in 2020, they had set about, I think, 21 trillion, 21.6 trillion. We're able to collect about only 19 trillion, You've seen the shortfall that they have registered in the current financial year as of half year, So all these definitely are concerning, Felix. Why is the expenditure increasing? And like Moses highlighted, this is just a draft, the 43. By the end, by May, it will have gone, mark my words, it will have gone up maybe close to even 45, because there are quite a number of issues that are going to emerge and they will try and consider them, okay? So we're seeing that the revenues are not going up, despite the target still being up. I remember the PSST in his recent communication was saying the target actually should have been left the way it was, than putting it up, Putting it up means what? From the trend that we have seen, it means they will have to come to you, Felix. They'll have to increase some rates. And I'm not being a prophet of doom, but wait and see the bills that will be tabled. I know some of them will be what we'd call bad taxes, those that are aimed at increasing the revenue, but at the cost of the Mutua 1C. So all these are questions that we want to see and are delving. Some of the hits, Moses had highlighted quite a number of these things. Some of the hits, what I would call the hits, yes. One of the key selling points that we have as a government, of course, is the parish development model. It's the bullseye. If we get it right, that's like the bullseye that will help turn the situation around that we've discussed about. And in the new, if you look at the budget framework paper, they're proposing to collapse quite a number of wealth funds that have been. And that's something that we welcome, but we have our reservations around it, that I would share. We are seeing, in terms of compliance to the gender and equity, this is an analysis that looks at how the budget has been compliant in terms of gender considerations. How have the youth been considered? How have the people with disabilities been considered? It has scored really well. Quite a number of programs, if you look at the analysis by the Equal Opportunities Commission, they have done really well on that. And that's something we commend. In terms of allocative efficiency simply means how well the allocations have been made to address some of the targets that the NDP would want to see achieved in order to see better outcomes. There's been some sort of shortfall in there, especially to the public sector transformation program, regional development program, where the local governments fall, and the climate and natural resources program. These are areas that we see are still lacking. However, I have to cut some slack to government. The area of storage and agro-processing, as well as value addition, there has been something good compared to what the NDP guided. So this is something they have been keen on to try and make sure at least the agro-industrialization component is at least well catered for in that next budget. So these are some of the good areas that we are seeing. However, local government financing has reduced, if you look at the current budget framework paper, from about 4.5 in the current financial year trillion to about 4.2. And you know, whenever a reduction in local government financing happens, the impact will be felt by us, you know. This is in light with the increase in the administrative units, remember. 10 cities, about 135 districts, 41 municipalities. There's recruitment of parish chiefs that's happening, you know, yet the allocation to support some of these have remained low. And if you look at the wage and non-wage component, these have remained unchanged, despite the staffing gaps, like I've showed you, you know. Lastly, on local government, 17% of that budget is what is going to development. Felix, me and you know what that means, honestly. That will simply show you that as much as, yes, the figures up there look amazing, the theme looks amazing, when you now trickle it down, some of these areas are concerning. Coming back to the center, if you look at the areas, yes, over the years they have been improving and they have a strategy in place of reducing domestic areas. But Felix, domestic areas are, you know, there are lots of service providers that give government service. And if you look at the repayments, I think in the current budget, the NBFP shows up, I think of about 400 billion that has been allocated just to pay for the areas. Remember, the current area figure, when it was audited, stands at around 1.3 trillion. So of that 1.3 trillion, how many of those people will be empowered to get back on their feet if just 400 billion is being allocated? Yes, we appreciate that at least something has been done, but that's an area of concern, you know. The other issue, we noticed that just a handful of agencies had submitted their strategic plans, you can imagine, for the next year's budget. So we're wondering, what are they budgeting? What's informing their budgeting? You know, a number of them, I can mention some, but I will not mention, you know, some that are quite obvious. And this we raised before Parliament. If you look at the program approach, there's still some, you know, hangover, if I may say, with the sector-wide approach. If you look at the budgets and you scrutinize them in the NBFP, you'll find quite a number of them still speak sector language. This is the third year of the NDP3. We are now in the third year. And financial year 2022-2023 will be the third year of the NDP, you know. So all these are areas that when you look at, yes, the theme is on point. Some of the allocations have been considered. If you dig deeper into some of the things that usually affect the implementation of our budget, a very good budget usually, these are areas that usually concern us. Finally, we have seen a number of non-adherences to the PFMA, despite it being premised overall. If you dig deeper, you'll find a number of weak safeguards on supplementary budgeting, you know, like Moses painted to you. By the end of the financial, you find our budget has shot up, and most of this is consumptive expenditure. So you'll find there are no safeguards. If you look through in terms of the guidelines, there are no particular safeguards around supplementary budgeting. MDAs are still misusing this. They miss out critical things at the time of supplementary, bring them and cause a stir in Parliament. You know, in terms of adherence to the climate change responsiveness, the PFMA section, the Climate Change Act, section 30B, does provide for the minister to ensure that MDAs have adhered to climate change responses. We've seen this happen, and this has been very critical all across the world. But we don't see that, yet it was passed. Without that, we see the contingencies fund. If you look through, I have checked severally, I've not seen anything being put for the contingencies fund. The contingencies fund is one supposed to help us when we experience unforeseen things like the COVID, for example. This is something we had not foreseen. Had we had a fund in place, this would help us to have a starting point. It would be a cushion for us to start and respond to. Section 26 of the Public Finance Management Act does provide that 0.5% of the previous budget will be provided and set aside for the contingencies fund. And goes ahead in Section 4, provide that this will be allocated to disasters, things that may come which we haven't planned for as a country. Felix, you know that that's good planning when you have contingencies in your budget. Even in our wedding budgets, we have contingencies. Why not in the national budget? If you look through critically, I don't know, and I've made some few calls to the Accountant General's office that manage this fund, and I've not seen any allocation to this. So those are some of the other anomalies I have seen regarding this NBFP, but overall, I think it's a beginning point to have the discussion. And all these issues that I'm raising, we have raised before Parliament, and some have been considered in the Budget Committee report, as well as the Minority report.
All right. We're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we go to the specifics, issues around supplementary financing. There's a big problem there in prioritization. When you have a human capital development allocation of 6.9 trillion, and that's where you have education and health, which I discussed, where are the priorities of government. We talked about issues around prioritizing agriculture, digital transformation. In there, they are trying to increase, address issues of unemployment, but you look at the allocations, the language speaks otherwise. Let's take a break and come back and look at the specifics of this discussion. Thank you.
So, Madam MP, I'm so honored to have you on this interview. So, for starters, how does it feel like being an MP? I want you to take me through your scope of work in this office.
So you really want me to take you through my day, how I spend my day?
Sure.
Let me start with office. Actually, I think this is something better. Why don't I hand over my office to you for something like 2 or 3 days?
That will be perfect, ma'am.
It will be perfect. So when will you be free?
We can do it now.
Now? I'm going to hand over my office to you for 24 hours.
Okay.
Right. This is a list of the calls I'm expecting today. These are the phones. You make sure you note down everything.
Okay. Have a good day.
Have a good day too.
Yes, please, Officer for MP. Yes. Please, I'll call you back. Hello, Officer for MP. How may I help you? Yes. Which place is that? Oh my God. How much? 14. My God! Is this what she goes through?
Oh, whatever. Thank God you're back. I can't do this anymore. But we agreed for 24 hours. What does that mean? I don't know how you do it. Let me just look back to you. Have you got enough for your story?
Enough. I got more than what I bargained for. Thank you so much.
Voters redefined the work of an MP. I buy food, I pay for burials, I pay school fees for so many, I pay hospital bills, I buy seeds and donate.
But why? Tell people the bitter truth.
They don't want to know.
Do your job.
Which is?
Make laws, protect the democratic government, oversee the implementation of the government programs.
They don't want to.
When will you ever put service before politics?
Tell voters I'm a politician, not a Rotarian. They should stop that begging culture of theirs.
Stop imposing such overwhelming demands on your MP. The statutory role of an MP is to perform legislation, oversight, budget approval, and representation.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
Welcome back from the break. We are still interrogating the proposed budget framework paper for financial year 2022-2023, and we are looking at the hits and the misses. With me, I have two gentlemen. One is an economist, and another one is a journalist, but who is really done a lot of covering around issues with the national budget in Parliament. I have Ainebyona, who is an economist from Civil Society Budget and Democracy Group, but also with me I have Moses Mulonda, who is the president of Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, and also a writer with New Vision, one of the leading dailies. Before we broke off, the two gentlemen had actually laid bare of what is entailed in the proposed budgets, and now let's go to the specifics. And I want to pick it from the point of supplementary budgets, because I think there's a very big concern there. I remember very well, somewhere last year, I've had the 3 months into the current financial year. Another supplementary budget of 3.8 trillion was presented. Again, last week, another supplementary budget of 4.7 trillion was presented. Looks like it's becoming a practice for government to always present supplementary budgets. And let me start with you, Moses. What explains this appetite, this pay chart for supplementary budgets? Is it a problem of our planning? Is there something we don't know? Moses, I can't hear you. I think you're muted. Unmute.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, proceed.
Okay, actually, in the minority report from the opposition, which was authored by Mwanga Chivumbi, John Baptist Nambeshe, and Goreti Namuga from Zimbabwe, I talked about their concern on capital flight, but their other major concern was actually on the supplementary budget. And their recommendation on that particular issue was actually even adopted by the whole House. Some of their recommendations were adopted, and that is one of them. The supplementary budgets actually are in contravention of what the Public Finance Management Act states, because they are supposed to be unforeseeable. But increasingly, yes, but increasingly we have been seeing actually most of them are foreseeable, and some because now, like for that 3.80 trillion which was approved in November last year, the bulk of it went to security, State House, and I remember still the biggest portion, more than $1 trillion, was to classified expenditure. So that is a very major concern. We hope, since Parliament last week adopted the recommendation from the opposition for government to minimize supplementary budgets, I hope some action will be taken, because it's a form of budgeting discipline. Like for example, for State House, for the last financial year, the initial budget of State House was in the range of 400 billion. But at the end of the financial year, because of supplementary budgets, it was close to $1 trillion shillings. So it means that the State House budget increased 2 times. It's unimaginable, but that is what happened. And of course, like you said, it points to poor planning. We hope, since Parliament has taken a decision on that, government will undertake some action to reduce it. I remember seeing the new Secretary to the Treasury will be promising that he would do something to ensure that he minimizes supplementary budgets. And but I also was in a recent meeting where the former Secretary to the Treasury, Mahakanis, was saying that the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance should not be blamed for the indiscipline in supplementary budgets, but their bosses, the political leaders, are responsible for that. So I hope, as because the budgeting process is still on, around the March 15th, government will be getting back to Parliament with budget policy statements, and around April, they will be getting back to Parliament with the revised budget estimates. That is around that time, at the beginning of April, is when we even hope to see any tax measures that government will be introducing for the next financial year. So the budgeting process is still on. That's what I have to say on that particular issue of supplementary budget.
Your platforms, send in your questions, your comments. They'll flash the social media accounts on below the screen so that you can be part of it. And any question, any comment, we'll be very glad to attend to it. Let me come to you, Ainebyona. A specific question to you. You may comment on the other one, but there's one which I want you to really rein in. The issue around the 43 trillion, which was approved. When I look at it closely, and I look at the way that's been cut, you are seeing that 15.6 trillion is earmarked for debt repayment. Then you have about 5.5 for the wage bill. Yet revenue collections that are projected are stand at around 21.1 trillion. So I think around 25 trillion.
25.5.
25 trillion, yes.
Yes.
When you make the mathematics and you add, you correct me if I'm wrong, it leaves a balance of about only 4.4 trillion. Help me understand how this can run the other remaining parts of the National Development Plan priorities. 3. How does this support development expenditure? Because for me, the mathematics doesn't add up.
Thank you very much, Felix. You're right. There's no need for any mathematics there. It's actually right. Maybe a small comment on supplementary budgeting. This is a thorn in our advocacy agenda, really. Felix, what Ugandans have to know is that the law actually does provide for supplementary budgeting. And a good budget, of course, should have a supplementary in place. Like I'd mentioned earlier, even a contingencies fund. It's part of this, really. But this supplementary budget, actually, the PFMA Act was revised and removed quite a number of those conditions of the unforeseeable, unavoidable. Those stayed in the Public Finance Management Regulations of 2016, not the Act, regulations. But no regulations, of course, guide the Act, So in the regulations, it was guided that at least these had to be of some sort of unforeseeable, unavoidable, unabsorbable nature. Things that you haven't planned for. Of course, you can't be planning now for salaries, really. You can't come and ask for supplementary and you have salaries in there. You have vehicles, you have travel abroad, things that at least a very good planning unit can foresee, and can avoid, So with this in mind, and the former PS, in a way, I agree with him, some of these things are actually politically driven and the technocrats don't have much to do in some of these processes. If you look at the current one, I had the chance to scrutinize it very, very, very deeply. You'll find about 800 billion of that, to be exact, 866, in my opinion, does not qualify for supplementary. This is an example. I picked one example from there. I saw the Ministry of ICT asking for about 90 million for allowances for communication task team for 90 days. An allowance in a supplementary. Really, those are very small things, but cumulatively they will affect what you just asked. That's why I wanted to use this as a basis of the question that you just asked. In the money that we have, what structures do we have in place to see that it works really well? Efficiently, I use the word allocative efficiency, that what you have allocated to that you have planned in your plans, in your NDP3. Okay? So this is something that we have learned over time, that MDAs, intelligent MDAs, usually will plan, leave out the critical things. For example, we love to use the example of, for example, UNEB. If UNEB did a budget and left out the component of marking exams, the allowances of marking maybe teacher exams, they would come to the floor of Parliament and cause a stir. Parliament would not be settled looking for the money for marking exams. Why? Because it's critical, you know. So some of these we have come to learn are done intentionally because they know they will receive them nevertheless. So it's an indiscipline and greatly undermines, of course, the planning and budgeting process. Quickly, to get back to your question, yes, I agree with you 100%. The math doesn't add up. Like I said, this is something that we continually kept on saying, that let's be careful on how we manage our projects, because most of that debt that we acquire, we take it to projects. I've had a chance to look and review at how most of the projects have performed. And for the first time, the Ministry of Finance has been very keen to throw out about 17 projects. According to them, they're not performing. They have been stunned. They have said these projects have exceeded their time. They're not bringing in any money. And with the money we've dispersed so far, we don't see any returns, sizable returns. And as such, they have taken them out. That's a very good move to begin with. But you're contracting debts to finance projects that you're not fully assessing. You know, you have project managers who underperform. Sometimes it's beyond them, but for most of them, they can control the circumstances. But you leave them, you promote them. There's no mechanism right now of a project manager when they fail to hit their targets that this will be done clearly to them. You see? So whereas that is in place, the debt is accumulating. And now we've started paying on the principal. We're no longer just paying on the interest payments. We've started committing to the principal. That's what has now chewed a big part of the budget now. The revenue question is also not going up. Yes, you put out and you launched a domestic revenue mobilization strategy, a very good one. I've had a chance to look at it. But right now, there's no implementation plan of maybe in this year, this is what we are going to do. This is what we are targeting. These are the areas we intend to target. And you consult widely that the taxes you'll bring will not be bad taxes. So all these are discussions. If you put the math together with what they are bringing, yes, it doesn't add up, Felix.
They are saying that supplementary budgets are a major avenue for misusing public funds. Indeed. Moses, let me bring you in here on, there's a question around governance and security, which is, there's an allocation of about 6.4 trillion. And when you talk about governance and security, we are talking about all these classified votes, Defense, State House, ESO. There is a word on the streets that this is a conduit for siphoning money. And give us your take, because in there, do we have hidden costs?
Of course, even the opposition leaders in parliament, there have been several times they have raised a red flag on this issue of classified budgets, because these classified budgets have been very huge, even before UPDF went to Congo recently, even when we didn't have any kind of war that within the country or anywhere. Because for Somalia, it's the UN and other development partners that fund the operations of UPDF there. So that's why many have been suspecting that perhaps this is a conduit that government uses. Because for classified expenditures, our viewers who may not know, this is money that you're not supposed to ask what it is going to do. It is closed. The details are closed. So and it has been increasing. About 5 years ago, it was about 300 billions, and right now, in the last financial year, it was about 3.80 trillion. So that is a very major concern. Felix, you talked about NDP 3. Even when you look at NDP 3, the allocation to the security program, actually, even the budget committee of parliament raised it, that security is getting more than what it is supposed to get according to the targets that we are set in NDP 3. And by the way, I have remembered I have to talk about this. It's very important. The latest report of the Auditor General, which was presented to Parliament this week, indicates that in the budget for the last financial year, the national budget was aligned to NDP 3 targets by about only 53%. And the major concern was that government is not allocating enough resources to the production sectors, the growth sectors that have a high economic returns, like tourism, like industry, like ICT, like agriculture. For example, for tourism, which actually is a leading contributor to our foreign exchange earning, it has been allocated only 181 billions. And Uganda Tourism Board, by the way, their budget was cut. It had reached 33 billion. It was cut to 16 billions. In East Africa, Rwanda injects about $40 million in marketing their tourism globally. Uganda puts in only $2 million. Kenya puts in more than $20 million. So, and yet we have more tourism attractions than all these countries surrounding us, by the way. Because according to so many international agencies like Lonely Planet, CNN, Rough Guides, they have all released reports indicating that Uganda is among the 5 top tourism destinations in the world because of having outstanding tourism attractions. But when it comes to the actual number of tourists coming in, the numbers are still very, very low because we are not putting in enough in marketing our tourism globally. We are just putting in just $2 million. So this is a very major concern, even from the people within the National Planning Authority. They are greatly concerned that the budget is not aligned to the NDP3 targets. And that was the same concern, by the way, for NDP2. Still NDP2, the national budgets were not aligned, fully aligned to the targets in NDP3 and NDP2. And that is why most of the targets that were set were not realized. Like on the issue of poverty, government had planned to reduce poverty from 19% to 14% in NDP2. But at the end of the NDP2 period, instead poverty had increased to about 22%. So that is a very major concern, that sectors that have a high rate of return on money invested, government continues to allocate them very meager resources. Even ICT is a sector that has potential to create so many jobs, to turn around the economy, but government continues to allocate it very meager, a very small budget, and but also you remember the excise duty on internet data of 12%, which has actually made our internet to be the most expensive in Africa. In the whole of Africa, it's only Uganda and Zambia that have introduced taxes that limit access to internet. When OTT was introduced, access to internet in Uganda reduced from 47% to only 33%, and the excise duty on internet data has worsened the situation. So, and yet in NDP3, this is one of the key sectors that were pointed out that where government would have to inject a lot and turn around the economy. But it's unfortunate that government continues to pay lip service to that sector. The resources allocated to it are very meager, but also introduces taxes that are actually stifling the growth of that sector of ICT.
Patra, can you unmute me? All right. Great. Let me come to you, Ainebyona, and probably you have a comment on that, because the same things Moses was raising as I had my concerns and reservations, which partly formed the question around where government priorities are. There's a direct mismatch between when government says it's intent on creating jobs, addressing poverty, addressing unemployment, and when, because the sectors that ideally would address that, which they even talk about, like ICT sector, tourism, agriculture, you don't see that translating into the priorities in terms of allocation to grow the economy, to grow the sector. But in a minute or two, you comment on that. But my other last question, because we have little time remaining, under 5 minutes, there's something around when you look at the same program-based budget, where you have the allocation to human capital development at around 6.9
6.9 trillion.
which is actually a reduction from 8 trillion in the current financial year, which is the same area that covers education and health. You don't seem to see government prioritizing investing in its people, in investing in the social sectors that are actually the drivers of talking about the middle income, growing the income to growing the people into the middle income, taking them into the middle income. You don't seem to see that. So where is government putting these priorities? When you look at the way the language it uses and the allocations that follow the language, is this just a mere political talk?
Thank you very much, Felix. You've asked a very, very brilliant question. That's a very, very good question. Felix, that's a question we always ask. I began, and this I did intentionally, I began by showing you the strategic focus, for example. If you look at the NDP3 theme, it's about increasing household incomes, really. It's bringing money. It's whatever planning that we do, ultimately, it should focus down to someone's pockets down there. I've showed you quite a number of expenditures that we went through as a country, out of pocket and, and the like. The theme for this budget for the first time has been changed. The previous budgets had a similar theme to the one of the NDP3. This one was very particular, and I know the current PSST had a lot to do with it. He's very keen. He believes his mantra, I think, is economics that works. Something I believe in so much. The current one, if I recall, is full monetization of the Ugandan economy through commercial agriculture. Mark my words. In my opinion, that should have been the first one in the budget to begin with. Agro-industrialization should have been up. Industrialization, market access, all these are even within the industrialization component. And the digital transformation that Moses has just talked about. The economy that we are in, you saw we went online almost. The companies that have been working through online, that have harnessed that opportunity, have made a lot of money. Somehow everyone, even my grandmother in the village, now you can engage her online almost. Something we didn't think of many years ago. So having that in a theme well stipulated, because he broke it down, that's why he said he's keen on having this put through. When you now go down, like you've asked, with that theme, I would expect agro-industrialization to be up. What's the percentage of people in the subsistence economy? About 39%. How many people are employed in the agriculture sector? So as the planning unit, that means you should be targeting those, not the minority. Sectors like Moses has talked about, tourism. If you look at the allocations to tourism, they have reduced tremendously. And like he has rightly put, we have attractions unlike any other country within East Africa. We have about, I think, close to 52% and above of arable land in East Africa. Ideally, we're supposed to be a food basket. So in my opinion, these are things that we don't even have to invest so much in. Somehow God has been good to us. Most of agriculture is rain-fed. So those are very, very low-hanging fruits as a planning unit to consider that, yes, this is what we have agreed to move by. Can we see it in the plans? I mentioned something about what we call allocative efficiency. And the budget committee did raise this in terms of, when they're analyzing this, they look at what the NDP3 had set out in a particular year of implementation versus what that annual budget has done. Ideally, at least, it shouldn't be so far. But now we can understand a tragedy befell us, something that we had not considered. And as such, this, of course, affected how we were planning this. The debt went up from what we had planned. The allocations, the different sectors of interest also changed. We saw a reduction in the human capital development program that you've seen. And partly that is due to a reducing support from external financing. The health sector is almost, I think, 85% externally supported. So some of that has reduced, which has had a very big impact on the entire budget. So some of these things need to make us think as a government. In the event USAID pulled out, what strategy as the government do we have in place to support the health sector that has been hit the most, if you see? And then finally, I love to ask the question of the current resources that we now have away from what we've now allocated. How are they being used, Felix? This is a question that is usually undermined. The Auditor General's Office shows you a number of unabsorbed funds. You're saying we release this money to agro-industrialization, but his report tells you a number of these are unabsorbed. Accounting officers failed to absorb some of these funds. So those are critical questions that, yes, as you plan very well, What do you have in place to make sure that what you've put is able to support and to be absorbed to achieve the allocative efficiency? Those are some of the questions that we pose in a nutshell.
All right. Our time is fast spent. In 30 seconds, Moses, your parting shots, and also in 30 seconds, and even your parting shots.
Thank ACFIM for this opportunity that you have provided to me and the other participants in this discussion for us to discuss the national budget. The budgeting process is still on, and I'm sure different stakeholders will be giving their proposals. I hope the executive and parliament will be able to listen to these proposals, especially from our colleagues like Ainebyona and others who are in the civil society, including ACFIM, CSBAG, and many others who have scrutinized the national budget and given a number of very good proposals which can help our economy to be turned around. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you too. And even your parting shots.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ACFIM. Once again, so it's a pleasure to come and share. I wish the time would be more so that we can dig into these issues more in depth. Nevertheless, Felix and the listeners, especially the members of parliament that are listening, the policymakers, the response to the crisis for economic recovery and growth calls for doing things in unconventional ways. We can't do things business as usual. Therefore, it's important that as we get into the next planning process, it's not yet late. There are things that we can revise and make sure that our budgets are efficient. That, for example, all the recommendations that have been put by the Auditor General's report, just let's begin with one of 2020. Sit down, have actionable plans of how these things will be reported. Otherwise, we'll keep on planning. The money will not be absorbed. The money will be misused. Strengthen the public infrastructure management system as well. That all the investments we make, let's increase the yield we get, really. The debts are increasing and they're not going any lower. Revenue is not going any higher. Let's put in place and strengthen our legal system that will allow us to utilize the funds that we have in place. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. That was Ainebyona, and then I had with me Moses Mulonda. We were discussing the hits and misses, looking at the budget framework paper for 2022-2023. Your host, Felix Kafuma. Thank you for being part of this discussion. Till next week, bye-bye, stay safe.